Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 12. So, we are coming down that home stretch. Summer's going to be here before you know it. And it almost feels like summer outside, doesn't it? So, let's move on to what we're doing this week. And this week, we're focusing on Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf was a very important female voice during the modernist movement and through both World War I and World War II. The first part you're going to read is from her book, A Room of One's Own, which was based on the premise that a woman could become a writer or could do anything she wanted to as long as she had a place where she could get away and write. Because a lot of women at this time, they didn't have their own private space to do a whole lot. Today we think of the man cave where a man can get away. Women didn't have that then. So women were so busy, raising families and being wives and doing all that stuff, and they didn't have much of a chance to become very literary. So the portion of, you're only reading a small chapter out of the Room of One's Own, and the portion that you're going to be reading is called Shakespeare's Sister. And the premise of Shakespeare's Sister is that what if William Shakespeare had a sister named Judith who was just as talented as he was, but back during the Renaissance, she was not allowed to be a writer, and she was not allowed to express herself because of the fact that she was a woman. And she's actually going to end up going crazy, and you'll see what happens as you read it. It's a very, very eye-opening reading, though, because it does state that if you repress people too much, they will go crazy, and bad things will happen. All right, so that's that part. Then we look at World War II. Remember, last week we looked at World War I, and World War I was so horrific that nobody thought there'd ever be another war. Well, about 30 years later, guess what happened? Hitler rose to power in Germany. He started trying to conquer Europe, and World War II was even more devastating than World War I. World War I was kind of centered mostly in Europe. There were fights going on between the Japanese and Chinese, and there were other fights going on. But even though we call it World War I, it wasn't as global a war as World War II would be. In World War II, just about every nation in the world was somehow involved. And it was even more devastating than World War I was. The death toll was higher. The effects on the lands were higher, and of course, as we know, that was when the nuclear bomb would be introduced. But we're not going to concentrate so much on the war itself as we are Virginia Woolf's writing Three Guineas. And the premise of Three Guineas is that women were so repressed in England that they did not really have the same rights as men in England. And women could lose their citizenship if they married a man from another country. So if you were an English woman and you married a Frenchman, you would then become a citizen of France and not of England. And so Virginia Woolf is going to come out in this Three Guineas and say, hey, men, you sit here and you talk about how you're going to war to protect us women from the invading powers, because unlike World War I, in World War II, Germany did directly drop bombs on London and in other parts of England as well. So, whereas in World War I, the women sent their men off to other parts of Europe and the men fought over there. In World War II, actually came to England, and London was bombed heavily by Hitler's Blitzkrieg. So, Woolf is going to say, well, you tell us that you're fighting for the honor of the English women. I'm telling you that we're not really citizens, or if we are, we're second-class citizens. And so she's going to start something called an outsider society, which consists only of women. And the loyalty to those women is not England. The loyalty to those women is the world. And therefore, if there's only one world, and if women say, well, men, we don't care if you fight for us or not, maybe there won't be a world war anymore, because everybody will get along because they're one united country with no women to fight for, if you will. So anyway, that's this week's readings. Virginia Woolf, a very important feminist author who made some very good points in both of the readings that you're going to read this week.